Alright guys, before we get started, let's take a quick look at some of these plasma glyphs. Now this image is from South America, and we talk about the mythology of the Bull of Heaven, and it is global. I've talked before about the feather of the Egyptian god Ma'at, and that it is simply the Z-pinch plasma of the high energy of the cataclysm. And so the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered the world's first great work of literature and poetry that was essentially lost to history. In the 1860s and 1870s, archaeologists acquired over 90,000 clay cuneiform tablets discovered in Iraq from the Assyrian Empire in dirt mounds, and also purchased from the local communities, where they were sent back to the British Museum, and where only a couple of people could even read them. And so in 1930, they published the Epic of Gilgamesh, and at that time it should have been the death knell for Judaism and Christianity, because of all of the stolen details of the flood story with the ark, and we'll get into that more in a little bit. But this story has it all. The goddess Inanna, who is associated with Venus, is said to have threatened a zombie apocalypse upon the planet. It's got immortality. It's got the slaying of a giant ogre. It's got the flood story. Talks about Shamash, which we know is associated with Saturn, and also Ninurtu, which is associated with Saturn. Talks about Ishtar, which is associated with Venus. The story of the serpent snatching away the gift of immortality. It's got the destruction of the Bull of Heaven. This is all compilation of cataclysmic oral text and tradition. This is also a remembrance of the so-called Mountain of God under Saturn. This Egyptian scarab here, it's the same type of thing. The stickman plasma under Saturn. These three planets locked in the Birkeland current, locked in the northern sky. It says, the idea that the sun was not eternal was shared by other American Indian tribes so widely that we consider it must have been part of their belief long before any high culture had arisen in the Americas. The Popol Vuh, lauded as the Mayan Bible, attests to the same idea. There, a previous sun god is described as follows. Like a man was the sun when it showed itself. It showed itself when it was born and remained fixed in the sky like a mirror. Certainly it was not the same sun which we see, it is said in their old tales. Could that be like a stickman? Equally widespread are traditions which report that a dragon-like monster once eclipsed the sun and brought the world to the brink of destruction. Countless cultures preserve memory of the terrifying time when Venus assumed a serpentine form, or when a spectacular conjunction of planets dominated the celestial landscape. Such traditions can be documented from one culture to another. The universal myth of a luminous stairway spanning the heavens. If we are to be faithful to the evidence, the most logical conclusion is that the stairway to heaven was a visible apparition associated with the ancient sun god during a particular phase of the polar configuration. And so this is the feather of the Egyptian god Ma'at, and it is also Jacob's ladder. And in the story of Exodus, in chapter 24, it talks about the 70 elders gathering with Moses and Aaron. It says they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet something like a pavement. This was the Z-pinch plasma, and this is also a contradiction because many other texts talk about how no man can see God, and yet here in Exodus 24 apparently they did. This is talking about Ishtar being associated with Venus. Funny that this is the glyph for the great god Anu. Very similar to what we speculate this polar configuration looked like, with Venus's streaming rays. It's an interesting picture of some tablet excavation. Now, in this Epic of Gilgamesh, all the details are there. And no one disputes that the Epic of Gilgamesh is much older than the Old Testament. And yet the details of the flood and the ark story are there. It talks about God giving instructions to build the ark and to bring all the animals on the ark. It mentions being grounded on the mountain, sending out a dove, performing a sacrifice, and the aroma being pleasing to the gods. All of this is in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In one section it says, the god Arakal was uprooting the mooring poles. Ninurta, passing by, made the wares overflow. The Anunnaki gods carried torches of fire, scorching the country with brilliant flashes. The stillness of the storm god passed over the sky, and all that was bright then turned into darkness. This text also mentions that the Anunnaki were the 7 judges of hell. So Ninurta, some scholars will tell you this image is Ninurta. Others will tell you it is Marduk. Others will tell you it is Gilgamesh. So there is much confusion, but they do know that Ninurta is associated with the planet Saturn. This also from Assyria. Looks like a Native American wearing a type of headdress with the feathers, but again, it is just a remembrance of the Z-pinch high energy plasma. Interesting depiction and recreation of the bull of heaven. Marduk is another god, and it is widely known to be associated with Jupiter. As I've talked about before, the Genesis probe showed that our current sun and Jupiter, only matches isotopically with Jupiter, and nothing else in the solar system. And so Jupiter coming along, scattering the polar configuration, is where you get the idea that Marduk created the constellations, the moon, all of the phases. He gave us our calendar, all from Marduk, because Marduk disrupted the plasma bubble that was limiting our sight of the constellations and the heavens. And that's why we have this idea of Marduk overtaking these other gods, because they saw it coming in and realized that their order was being disrupted. As the Sun and Jupiter system collided with our Birkeland current Saturn system. And that is what inspired this Epic of Gilgamesh. And the destruction of the Bull of Heaven with this serpentine type of electricity. Another interesting image I wanted to include and again, this is raw. This is all of the different regional gods, which can be very exhausting to try to research the thousands of gods that are referred to regionally. This is the electrical thunderbolts of the gods, documented. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good night.